Srimati Sonia Gandhi, Chairperson and Trustees of the Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Fund, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, members of the Jackson family and entourage, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you all to the Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Fund and the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Reverend, this is the National Memorial to Jawaharlal Nehru. There's a library, there's the house where he lived, the Teen Murti house, and this whole area is a national memorial to Jawaharlal Nehru. And every year we have the annual Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Lecture, which is a much awaited intellectual event in the capital. And today we have a very charismatic and well-known figure, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, to speak to us. But before I request Srimati Gandhi to deliver her welcome speech, there is a small and pleasant formality that we fulfill. There are two schools in Germany in the name of Nehru School of Lützowitz and the Indira Gandhi School of Chemnitz. And every year, our embassy there, at their recommendation, we give a Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Medal to the top-ranking student in the highest class of the Nehru School. So this year, and every year they come here with a teacher. This year, the young lady, it's always the women who seem, the girls who seem to win the prize, Miss Nicole Teichert, accompanied by a teacher, has come to receive the medal. I would request them to please come up. And receive the medal from Srimati Sonia Gandhi. I'm going to request Peril to make a welcome speech.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, Dr. Karan Singh, friends, young friends from Germany, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In 1959, Dr. Martin Luther King, a most distinguished American, visited our country for a month at the personal invitation of Jawaharlal Nehru. Both spent long hours in discussion together. When Jawaharlal Nehru died in 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King drew attention to the global impact of the personality and ideas of India's first Prime Minister, saying that the towering figure of Nehru sits unseen but felt, and that because he is so wanted, he is a living force. These are words which resonate even today. 48 years later, this evening, we have one of Dr. King's aides amidst us, right next to Teen Murti, the house where Martin Luther King and Jawaharlal Nehru met. Following in the footsteps of his mentor, Jesse Jackson has been a crusader for civil rights in his own country. He has been a tireless champion for peace in West Asia particularly, and has played an important role in awakening the conscience of the world community to challenges in Africa. He has been outspoken as a political activist and campaigner, and is recognized as a fearless voice against indignity, injustice, and exploitation. Jesse Jackson's voice has eased the pain of those caught in the crossfire of conflict. It has helped diffuse ethnic tensions and bridge racial inequities. It has been a voice rooted in faith as much as in a deep belief in the cause of peace and harmony among communities and in the world. A renowned orator, he has twice been a candidate for the presidency of the United States, attracting several million voters each time. He has been active in the politics of his country, participating in other elections, espousing humanitarian and social causes. He has an abiding commitment to the welfare of the young, especially from the less privileged sections of American society. We are therefore delighted to welcome him on this occasion that honors the memory of Jawaharlal Nehru. To say that Jawaharlal Nehru has shaped contemporary India in every way is to state the obvious. Whatever we are today, a representative parliamentary democracy with a profound commitment to secular values, a rapidly growing economy with an abiding concern for equity and welfare, a society celebrating many diversities while retaining its unity, a nation with a growing international role. These are all the enduring contributions of this remarkable person. Modernization, a scientific temper, industrial development, education and learning, among others, were his priorities at a time when our nation was just emerging from centuries of subjugation and exploitation. Many aspects of India's progress that are being widely acknowledged today are rooted in the policies and programs that, in his far-sightedness, he initiated and instituted. India's science and technology infrastructure, which is drawing us global acclaim, is the result of his vision and his tireless efforts. He gave to India a clear sense of purpose, a global identity that was true both to itself and to the interests of the newly independent nations. At the same time, he remained a relentless campaigner for peace and international equality among nations. A statesman, writer, and philosopher, Jawaharlal Nehru is for us and the world both a man of the intellect and a man of action. The Nehru Memorial Lectures have been, over the years, as wide-ranging as they have been topical. They have given us new insights and perspectives, bringing to us a diversity of opinion and analysis, all of which have enriched us in our understanding of the affairs of the world around us. It is with great pleasure that I now welcome Reverend Jesse Jackson to deliver this year's Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Lecture. Thank you.
The first great 9/11, 100 years ago, on September 11th, 1906, Mahatma Gandhi, then a young barrister from India, it is written, gave a stirring call for peaceful, nonviolent resistance and against discrimination and injustice at a public meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa. Gandhi introduced to the world the philosophy of Satyagraha as a source of truth and gave a powerful voice to men and women seeking liberation, working on behalf of the weak and helpless. This movement for freedom and dignity had a profound influence on people worldwide, showed that the soul force of love, truth, and reconciliation unleashed that day have outlasted guns and bombs and schemes of oppressive rule. Let me express my thanks to the Jawaharlal Memorial Fund and its chairperson, Sonia Gandhi, and Dr. Karan Singh, President, Indian Council for Cultural Relations, whose knowledge as a Hindu scholar is so refreshing and penetrating. for the invitation to be a part of this great tradition in this great nation of India. Our presence today comes at a moment in time so pregnant with promise and peril. I want to thank the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Honorable Anand Sharma, for sharing your vision of a plan to continue growing while lifting the rural poor from the shackles of poverty. The loss of human potential because of poverty and inattention is too great a burden for any nation to bear. I'm encouraged by the huge role that Indian Americans are playing in America in global technological development. The more than 80,000 Indian students in the U.S. investing more than $3 billion a year in that economy. I'm more than encouraged by your willingness to help institutionalize the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mahatma Gandhi lineage, with some reciprocal scholarship plan between African Americans and Indian students, with cultural exchanges. Such a cross-fertilization makes all of us stronger and makes heaven happy. You have been such generous hosts, allowing me in these few days to come to some measure of travel and to drink deeply from well springs of your spirituality and culture. Mrs. Gandhi had just given a magnificent speech at the United Nations on October 2nd, the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, proclaimed the International Day of Nonviolence. This speech was full of clarity and wisdom. It evoked such a great response at that world setting. All who listened were enthralled. I was the most blessed of all, having the opportunity to sit with her at lunch, a global holiday, recognizing the contributions of Gandhi, an international holiday, Dr. King, a national holiday. The enemies failed. They defied death. They remained the winners. The bullets did not stop them. We shared conversations about challenges facing the rural community, and I could not resist talking about the work of her late husband. Rajiv and I had last met in Namibia at Sam Njomo's inauguration. We celebrated Namibia's independence. It was painful for me to hear, but just a few weeks later, so I prepared to write to him that like a long line of freedom fighters for peace and justice and development, he was a victim of a cowardly act of violence. We had so many plans to work on so many fronts here in India, in the US, and with the non-aligned nations. In our conversations, we talked of Nehru and Gandhi, the era's liberators who were political change agents with spiritual depth, whose services transformed freedom movements around the world. Prime Minister Nehru met with Nkrumah, embracing the hope of Gandhi's independence in '57 and African liberation. And your first Prime Minister, that great man, invited Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to India, himself a disciple of Gandhi, to visit India in 1959. They had a lot in common. My journey to India has long been anticipated. I want to see the land of the world's greatest and largest democracy, the land liberated by the science of nonviolent resistance, led by the great and prophetic Mahatma Gandhi, with young Nehru at his side. They used love and suffering and sacrifice and political acumen as weapons of hope and change. They shunned the zero-sum game of mutual destruction. I've gone to see the Taj Mahal. I visited the temple, Swarnamarian, Ashradam. I could not resist going back twice with my family. It was so informing and enlightening. It both heightened and deepened our religious journey, giving me a renewed sense of the roots of the Christian religion. The influence of Indian spirituality upon our faith must be greatly appreciated. There were other sites on our itinerary. I want to see Gandhi's birthplace. Instead, I visited the place where he was assassinated and laid a wreath. I reflect upon the scientific impact of Gandhi, upon the kings of scientific nonviolence and how they were brutally killed, But neither was a period, but merely a punctuation mark, a comma, a pause, as they transitioned into greater service in their next life. Graves could not contain them. They live afresh in the hearts of freedom lovers who struggle every day throughout the earth. To stand where he last stood is chilling. Yet the power of the soul and its supernatural powers cannot be killed. They change forms and spread their wings, and the wind blows them around the earth today. My perilous predicament of Pakistan has intercepted much of my planned travel and to see India and meditate about its wonders. Mrs. Bhutto invited me to Pakistan to visit with her. I made an appeal to President Musharraf and hope I can meet with them and play some role in reconciliation. The stakes are too high for people of conscience to be silent, detached, or afraid. Nehru once said, life is like a game of cards. The hand that is dealt you is determinism. The way you play it is free will. Aggressively seeking reconciliation is how I assert my free will and priorities. He said, while affirming that long-range planning is important, a leader or a man of action in a crisis always acts subconsciously and then thinks through the reasons for his actions. So we must remain relevant and current. The suspension of democracy and the state of emergency in Pakistan is testing the United States and the world's resolve and its moral authority and its quest for freedom. We must choose bargaining table over battlefield and coexistence over co-annihilation, and use guided minds and not misguided missiles. War is a moral and intellectual failure. It is lose-lose. We must pursue win-win. Pakistan, its sense of security and its commitment to democracy must get back on track. The burden is upon Mr. Musharraf to restore transparent democratic order, stability in his country. Hope he will heed the world's pleas. The world is watching. Remember Gandhi and Dr. King and Nehru and Jesus and Mandela. We often admire them, but will not follow them. Too often we do not adhere to their lessons of peaceful coexistence over threats of war and annihilation. These times test the courage of our leadership. Those who would be declared leaders must know the perilous road is never risk-free. The risk of great changes in South Africa and North America, freedom movements around the world, much of that force emanated from India. The irony is that so many of these leaders were jailed or killed pursuing the noble proposition of freedom. Yet their sacrifices fueled the liberation movements the world over. The crisis next door in Pakistan threatens the world family. It's not merely a crisis, it's an opportunity for us to play a unique role in resolution, to adjudicate a dispute that could trigger world destruction. We're so close to promise and yet so close to peril. We cannot conduct surgery in remote villages. We now can conduct surgery in remote villages in Africa from India's hospitals, or make a mistake in Pakistan next door and unleash destruction unequaled in the history of the world. It will take more strength to reach out and reconcile, to forgive and redeem, than to keep pushing us to more unresolved conflict. Democratic debate, checks and balances, separation of powers is worth the risk. Gandhi's use of soul force to resist evil remains relevant today. He saw violence as a weakness to resolve conflicts, not a strength. There is no future in violence. The giant technological advances must not go off our moral mission to defend the poor and deliver the needy and set the captives free. We're not advancing if we lose our compassion or sense of human values that really matter. Reports from the World Bank indicate that the average percent of global poor is 21%. 1.1 billion people who live in less than $1 a day. Africa has the largest share, 46%. South Asia, 32%. East Asia and the Pacific, 15%. Latin America and the Caribbean, 10%. Eastern Europe and Central Asia, 5%. Middle East and Northern Africa, 2%. Thus, the 15% in poverty in the U.S. is better than the global average, but still pitiful for the richest nation in the world. As we celebrate the end of the slave trade, slavery, and colonialism, one of the most devastating legacies was the denial of access to education, and thus the benefits of development that come from education. Strong minds break strong chains. Let's dispel any myths that the gulf between the surplus culture, the deficit culture, are natural. They're normal, but that norm can change. In this, the first world, diverse and adequate education must become the norm. The gap today is not a talent gap, it's an opportunity gap, and too often an investment gap. We must educate our youth sufficient in numbers to sustain hope and growth. In this new and inclusive world, so connected by technology, there is a force called globalization. In this new world, half of all human beings are Asian. Half of them are Chinese. 1/8 is African, 1/4 of them are Nigerian. 1,100,000,000 are in India alone. In the Western Hemisphere, English is a minority language. 2/3 of North America's neighbors speak Spanish. And Mr. Putin and Mr. Bush meet. They represent 1/8 of the human race. It is a minority meeting. Most people in the world are yellow, are brown, are black, non-Christian, poor, female, young, and don't speak English. It is this world that we are called upon to serve, to help lead to higher ground. In this world, students must remain energetic of freedom fighters, and they're called upon to do at least 3 things. Study diligently and succeed. Do well. Don't look down on those who could not get the opportunity, and lift others as you climb and bring others along. After the labors of Nehru and Gandhi and Dr. King and Mandela, we are free from slavery and colonial rule, for the most part. The goal of our struggle was never simply freedom. It was equality. Freedom is a prerequisite in the fight for equality, but even beyond equality, it is not enough to be co-equal on a sinking ship. We must have a value system beyond equality. We must have a vision beyond decadent values of greed and war and conquest and power. We must heal the whole community. We must secure the environment, end unnecessary wars, and have a one big tent vision. One measure of who we are lies in how we treat the young in the dawn of life, how we treat the poor in the pit of life, how we treat the old in the sunset of life. The genius of the biblical character Joseph, a Mandela, or Dr. King, or Jesus, or Nehru, or Gandhi, was that they were not merely limited by ethnic considerations. They had majority visions to lift up the whole lot of all of the people. I want to live up some perils and promise of globalization tonight. In this new technological world, a one-world economy bound by a scientific network of communications, I never seem to be astonished that you can fly from Chicago to New Delhi or Bombay non-stop, or from Chicago to London or Paris in just 6 hours. But the crisis in either of those airports can alter traffic in the rest of the whole world. But our new capacity for speed must not outdistance our moral commitment to do right, be just and compassionate. Globalization. We're inextricably bound in this tightly connected puzzle. Every piece matters. In this quilt, every patch matters. Nazism and fascism and anti-Semitism and racism and nuclear weapons. These cancerous poisons cannot be contained. They keep us on the edge. They metastasize really fast and they kill. Globalization is full of promises and peril. Global energy can warm us and transport us, or it can be used to manipulate prices to control and polarize us, or it can instigate a war in Iraq or sustain a genocidal war in Darfur. Globalization. We can share resistance to injustice. We can research on global diseases and do delicate surgery from a foreign land to a faraway place. A search for cheap labor and undermine human growth and opportunity and disrupt nations. Globalization. Global terror is a car bomb or a suicide bomber. It can also be undrinkable water. More die from undrinkable water in the world than from AIDS. It can be crippling poverty amidst plenty, protracted genocide. Global terror is sometimes the unmelodious voice and misguided voices of hateful people. Often it is the voice of the unheard, the dispossessed, and the desperate. In my nation, the United States, globalization has increased our capacity for violence at home and around the world. We're not fighting a war in Iraq using weapons, semi-automatic weapons that uses AK-47s, weapons that are being made legal again in the United States. We fight against weapons of mass destruction and supply them at home. We've lost nearly 4,000 Americans in Iraq in the last 4 years. We lose 30,000 a year to gunfire at home, 100,000 more are injured. In America today, we're not fighting racial justice vigorously. 2 million Americans in jail, 900,000 are black. In several states, the largest industry, the jail industrial complex, for profit. 5 grams of crack cocaine, mandatory sentencing, 500 grams of powder, probation. In New Jersey, a black youth is 60 times more likely to be expelled than a kid who is white for the same infraction. Illinois, 7% drug users are white, 10% are black. Jail, 66% black. For whites, rehabilitation. For blacks, jail. In most cities, 7/10 blacks do not finish high school. Globalization has not helped us resolve our will to do justice beyond race and color and gender. Globalization. Global banking. It can spread capital and resources and development to the far reaches downward through microloans, downward. Or it can spread upward with reckless schemes of exploitation. For example, the subprime lending schemes in the United States have 2.2 million families in danger of losing their homes in the next few months. Foreclosure. A 10% decline in housing prices will amount to $2.3 trillion in economic losses, according to Goldman Sachs. Economic losses, according to Goldman Sachs, are staggering. Economic damages to financial services companies could be as high as $400 billion in the next few months. They may be forced to cut lending by $2 trillion, which could trigger a major economic recession. To date, these institutions have suffered the following losses. Citigroup, $11 billion and rising. Merrill Lynch, $8 billion up to $20 billion and rising. Morgan Stanley, $4 billion and rising. Bear Stearns, $4 billion and rising. UBS, $4 billion and rising. Deutsche Bank, $4 billion. Credit Suisse, $1 billion. Wachovia, $1 billion and rising. But not only is the subprime lending crisis shaking up banks in America and New York, Citigroup, Merrill Lynch, also banks in England. The CEO of Northern Rock was forced to